there, Epidemics. We've got a lot of students that are late today, but I thought we would go ahead and get started without them. Megan, go ahead.
I have a quick question about Essay 2.
Okay.
So I noticed on Essay 1, it said that we had to use like an outside source besides class information. Should we use an outside source on Essay 2 as well?
Yes.
Okay, and just one is fine.
Just one is fine. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so Essay 2 is coming up, due on Sunday, but next week is spring break. The only thing I'm giving you to do over spring break is to read a short article that you'll need to read before we get back from spring break. Otherwise, relax, enjoy your spring break. I will be desperately trying to catch up on the grading. Okay. I didn't get any response last time, so I'm going to ask again. If anybody is willing to share their notes, please let me know. One of your classmates is looking for someone to share notes. Just got to reach out to me and let me know you're available. All right, so the topic for today is Ebola. So Ebola is well, as far as we know, it's relatively new. The first cases that the world was aware of started in August 1976. A school teacher Mabalo Lokela, probably badly mispronounced there, was a school teacher in a remote village in Zaire. Zaire is now part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. He went on vacation. He went hunting, visited friends in nearby villages, comes back, not feeling so good. So he went to the nearest clinic, which was in a different town. It was run by nuns. There were no doctors on staff and very few resources. Within a week, Lokela was too weak to get out of bed. He was vomiting blood. He had bloody diarrhea, and he was bleeding from his eyes, ears, and mouth. The nuns had originally thought it was malaria and tried treating him for malaria, but at this point, it was clear it was not malaria, and they had no idea what to do with it. So they did their best to make him comfortable, but on September 7th, he died. This was Nate, go ahead.
Is this considered a viral hemorrhagic fever? I actually was just reading about these for my essay. Okay, thanks.
Yep, it is. We'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so the nuns reached out to the government and said, hey, look, there's this disease. It's new, it's weird. And it was starting to spread. So the Zaire government tried to send the army in to control it, but by then it was already too late. It had already spread. and it eventually spread to more than 50 villages and the capital of Zaire, Kinshasa. During this outbreak, 318 people came down with Ebola. 280 died. This was a case fatality rate of 88%. So the world hears about this. They hear about this outbreak of an unknown disease. At the time, it was an unknown disease. And, you know, people start talking about it, researchers and doctors. I got to go to the next screen. So if you want a screenshot of this. So these cases were in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, right here in the center of the continent of Africa. But it turns out that in Sudan, the area that's now South Sudan, a few months earlier, there was a similar outbreak. This outbreak was not as well documented. There were 284 cases and 151 died. So that's a case fatality rate of only 50%. When you compare it to 88%, it's a big, big difference. So researchers were like freaking out, right? We've got this new disease. It's shown up in 2 different countries at the same time. Well, they started looking at it and they looked at the blood samples and they found similar looking viruses in each. And the Ebola virus looks strange. It's got an unusual appearance. So it's pretty easy to say this is Ebola or a relative. But now, since then, we've done genetic analysis, and these are actually 2 different subtypes. So it's actually a coincidence that the 2 first documented outbreaks of Ebola happened at about the same time. But they both, you know, killed a high percentage of infected people and then kind of just petered out. So, what is Ebola? Oops. As Nate mentioned, it is a viral hemorrhagic fever. Viral means it's caused by a virus. Hemorrhagic means you bleed, and fever is a fever. So when we look at the symptoms, there's a lot of symptoms of Ebola. And that bleeding happens in between 20 and 60% of cases, depending on the strain of Ebola. There are actually a collection of closely related viruses that make up Ebola. So it's not the exact same virus, but it's kind of like saying this strain of Ebola is like a German Shepherd and that strain of Ebola is like a Labrador. They're closely related, but they have slightly different characteristics. when we look at the symptoms, we start out with typical fever, flu-like symptoms. You've got the fever, headache, sore throat, difficulty breathing. You'll get aches and weaknesses. You'll get diarrhea eventually. You'll get a rash eventually. And clotting is messed up. So you get reduced clotting, which lends or makes it more likely that you're going to have bleeding. And bleeding is primarily in the digestive tract. So there's one weird symptom. Hiccups. Boy, I just went right over that word. Let's try that again. Let's just go with an arrow. Hiccups. A lot of Ebola patients have hiccups. Weird symptom. It's unusual. It is one of the characteristics that help doctors figure out this might be Ebola early in the infection, because a lot of these symptoms just look like other diseases like malaria. The disease lasts about 2 weeks. Death is often due to fluid loss. So when we say somebody bleeds out, you bleed so much that you don't have enough fluid in your body for your cells to survive. And depending on the strain and your health care, the death rate runs between 25 and 90%. And if you survive, a lot of survivors often have long-term post-viral symptoms, including fatigue and weakness, including vision problems and poor appetite. So it's not like you get it and you're done. Chances are you're going to have some kinds of post-viral symptoms, things that persist after you've recovered. We're going to talk more about this towards the end of the semester, because this is something that has just recently been recognized, and it seems to be common for several different viruses. Julia, go ahead.
This is probably like a really dumb question, just because like the diseases are very different. But remember when in like 2015 when Ebola made its way to the US, and like everyone started freaking out, and like was it labeled a pandemic here? I can't remember, or no.
No, it was not labeled a pandemic here.
Yeah, so is it because the diseases are different? Like how are they able to control Ebola? Not like it, but like COVID just got out of control.
Okay, so the primary reason we can control Ebola better than COVID is airborne.
Okay.
Ebola is not.
How do you get Ebola?
You have to have contact with bodily fluids.
Oh, okay.
Blood, but also things like vomit, diarrhea, semen. It can be in the semen. So you have to have contact with that, and it has to get across your skin or into your mucous membranes.
Okay.
That's 2 slides from now.
Okay.
See, that wasn't a dumb question. I'm planning to talk about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, screenshot if you need it. Okay. All right. So where does Ebola come from? Because we know there have been multiple outbreaks of Ebola in multiple parts of Africa. And then it goes away and then it comes back. So how come this keeps coming back? How come it comes out again and again and again? Well, it infects primarily primates, especially the apes. So it'll often be seen, chimpanzees and gorilla numbers decline at about the same time as there's an outbreak in people, or right before. But it's also found in other wildlife, including these guys. These are called duikers. Hi. It's a small forest dwelling antelope, and it's often used as a food supply. And we're going to get to the bat part in a second, but we think it infects bats. So generally speaking, we think outbreaks begin with contact with an infected animal, usually through hunting or consumption of wild game or scavenging wild game. So a lot of places where Ebola happens are incredibly impoverished. And if you want protein, you got to go out and get it yourself. It's hard to get enough protein without including hunting. And if you're out hunting and you find a recently dead duiker, well, hey, free protein, great. Unfortunately, sometimes it died because it was sick. So our current belief is there is what we call a reservoir host, which is an animal that can get Ebola without dying, basically. Only minor or no symptoms. And so Ebola can pass around this reservoir host, and kind of that's where it stays when it's not causing an outbreak in the primates and the other wildlife and us. So I think I have another slide. So take a screenshot so I can go to the next slide, because I think I've got another one here.
So don't eat roadkill is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, don't eat roadkill. Okay, yeah, I did put this one in. Good. So we think that Ebola may survive in bats. We have seen related viruses in bats. There are bats that have been found to have antibodies to Ebola, but no one has found active Ebola infection in bats. So this is a hypothesis that we have not been able to prove. In 1999 and 2000, a guy named Dr. Mike Fay, that's this scrawny white guy here, conducted what he called a mega transect. This lasted for 465 days and over 2,000 miles across the Congo Basin. So this is the kind of conditions that they were walking in. So what is a transect? A transect is usually a method of conducting ecological surveys. So the people conducting the transect go in, usually you go in as close to a straight line as possible. And you record all of the vegetation that you see. You record all of the animals that you see. In this particular one, they actually collected tissue samples and specimens during this mega transect. You can see that the conditions were harsh. This poor guy's up to his nose in the water, carrying a heavy backpack. So they collected thousands of animals on this mega transect. How many do you think they found with Ebola?
%, for sure.
Nope.
100%?
Nope.
0%?
Yes, none. They found no Ebola. And they looked at things like bats and rodents, which we think of as the most likely reservoir species. They didn't find it. Is it bats? Maybe, but we don't know for sure because we haven't found infected bats. Okay. So that is kind of the search for the reservoir host for Ebola, which is still ongoing and we still don't know what it is. So screenshot again. You got to admire all of these guys that hiked for over a year and over 2,000 miles through this kind of condition. Oh, man, that must have just been rough. I've walked transects, but the longest one I've done was 20 miles.
And it's not like straight miles. It's up and down, left and right, tree trunks and roots. And
yep,
wow.
There's no trail. You're just cross country through the bush. Okay. So Ebola is highly contagious, but it's contagious. You need to be in close contact and you need to be exposed to fluids, blood, semen, vomit, and oh God, I've got to spell diarrhea. And that's wrong, I think. Anyway, you know what I mean. So these fluids can contain the virus, and exposure to them, you know, there's your problem. Transmission is also common in hospital settings where they reuse needles. A lot of places that get Ebola outbreaks, I've mentioned this before, are incredibly impoverished. And they might have 6 needles at a clinic. And they have to use them until they get another donation. So they use them over and over and over again because they just don't have any more. A lot of these places also don't have appropriate protective equipment. Do they have disposable gloves? Maybe a couple of pairs that they reuse. Do they have the full protective suit that the Europeans who come in and help fight these outbreaks have? No, of course not. There have been approximately 24 outbreaks of Ebola. The last outbreak was in February to May of 2021. But the largest outbreak, which is the one I want to talk about, started in 2014, lasted for 2 years, and hit 6 different countries in West Africa. There were 28,000 infections and 11,000 deaths. This particular outbreak was the one that also spread outside of Africa. So there were 5 cases in America, and it spread within America. So one person brought the disease back to Texas, and 2 of the nurses who cared for that person also contracted Ebola. There were 3 cases in Europe, and there was 1 death total.
Professor, you think it could have entered through their cuticles possibly?
Yeah, if you've got cuts in your cuticles, absolutely. Any kind of cut on your hand, absolutely. If it gets on your mucous membranes, your mouth, your nose, your eyes, yep, that's how it gets in. Okay, so the 2014 outbreak began in Guinea. And it started with a 2-year-old boy. It rapidly crossed the border from Guinea into Sierra Leone and Liberia. Doctors Without Borders were getting reports of disease in these areas and noticed that the reports often mentioned hiccups. And that was it. When they saw those reports saying hiccups, the red flags went up that this could be Ebola. Even so, this was not an area that had experienced Ebola before. Most of the Ebola cases, if you look on the inset map, were down here, Congo, South Sudan, and this kind of Central Africa area. So this was a new area for it. Okay, screenshot. This is Ebola PPE. Personal protective equipment. The process of putting this costume on and taking it off after dealing with Ebola patients is very precise to minimize potential exposures. And generally what happens is the person in the PPE comes out, they get showered off with like a bleach solution or an antimicrobial solution. And someone watches and tells them, okay, take this off. Now take this off. Now take this off. And they're watching to see if there's any deviation. Maybe the person takes their goggles off and still has their gloves on. That's a potential exposure. Doctors Without Borders and the World Health Organization went into the Guinea area, started setting up field hospitals, and brought this kind of protective equipment. No, I do want to be here. They whisked people into field hospitals and foreign-built isolation wards. So they were coming in, building these isolation wards. And many of these sick people died without ever seeing their family. Family was not allowed to visit. In addition, families were often refused traditional burial practices. The World Health Organization and Doctors Without Borders would bury people. They would zip them in a body bag, wearing their full protective equipment, and bury them. Imagine you live in Guinea and these foreign invaders come in and they're wearing these weird outfits and they take your family members and you never see your family member again. What is your response going to be? Fear. This caused a lot of fear. There were rumors. There were conspiracy theories. Some people claimed the foreigners were harvesting organs. And if you know any history of how the Europeans treated people in Africa, you can understand this, because the Europeans were not nice people when they invaded Africa. There was a lot of bad stuff going on. And in fact, 8 aid workers were killed during this outbreak, and people hid sick family members, thinking that they were keeping them safe from the foreigners. But where did the 2-year-old get it from? We've got an index case, a first case in a 2-year-old child. We know where it started. Where did this 2-year-old child catch Ebola? Well, there's a hypothesis. The village had a hollow tree with a colony of Angolan free-tailed bats. And the local kids would play near the tree. I mean, you know, if you can get inside of a tree, isn't that cool? Especially if you're a kid, it's fun to play there. And sometimes they would capture, kill, and eat the bats. The children would. So when these virus hunters, the people who were trying to figure out the reservoir host for Ebola, they heard about this, they rushed to that village. The tree had been burned. It's not clear if it was deliberate or if it was natural, but it was gone and they weren't able to capture any bats to get samples. So how do we deal with these sorts of outbreaks? Containment, contact tracing and control, and education. So containment, you isolate cases. You use the correct sterilization procedures for the bedding, for anything that is used on those patients. You use appropriate protective equipment. You trace their contacts. Who have they been in contact with? And you monitor those contacts to see if they are developing symptoms so that you can isolate them and treat them. And education. And of course, this is a hard one, but it's a very, very important one. We can talk about, letting people know this is Ebola. It's contagious through bodily fluid. This is why we are wearing these ridiculous outfits. This is what is happening. These are the risks. These are how you reduce them. Not everybody's going to believe that. We see that today, right? We know how COVID is spread, and yet we have people who are like, I can't wear a mask. Oh my God. I'm like, really? When you go out in public, do you wear shoes and pants? We can also provide water and soap. A lot of these areas, they don't have running water. They don't have good access to soap, or they have to make their own. Ebola is a disease of extreme poverty, poor health care, and low levels of education. All of these three things make epidemics worse. Any epidemic that we talk about is going to be worse in areas that have these conditions. There's a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation, which leads to fear. Fear leads to violence, and aid workers die, or they can't do their jobs, or they're afraid to go into that area and try and do their jobs because people are being killed. Okay, take a screenshot. So this is an electron micrograph of the Ebola virus. This is a weird looking virus. Most of the viruses we've looked at have been kind of round, vaguely round shapes. But this thing has got this long, stringy structure, and it branches. This is why we can spot this virus microscopically and be pretty confident that we're looking at Ebola or a close relative of it. So what do we do? What are the treatments? There are a few treatments, but mostly it's supportive care, especially maintaining hydration with IVs. Supportive care by itself can significantly reduce mortality or number of deaths. If the patient starts bleeding, that's a bad sign. And it usually leads to death. So if you have minor bleeding, you might survive, but if you have a lot of bleeding, that's bad. On the really, really, really good news front, there's a vaccine. This is relatively new. People have been trying to develop a vaccine for a while. But in order to test the vaccine, you're not going to give the vaccine to people and then expose them to Ebola. Ebola is just too deadly. We're not going to do that to people in modern times. But we can test the vaccine when there's an outbreak. And in 2016, the end of this largest outbreak ever, vaccination began. And the vaccine was given to 6,000 people. And none of them caught Ebola. When you compared it to 6,000 people of the same ages and genders and jobs and that sort of stuff, several hundred got Ebola. So it clearly helped. And in 2018, there was an outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Vaccination ended that outbreak very quickly. Okay, screenshot. All right, let me describe this graphic for you guys because it's a complicated graphic. We think bats are the reservoir host for the Ebola viruses. There are several different ones. If you're not reading the chat, Nate just said, those goddamn bats again. You're absolutely right, Nate. So there are, let's see, depending on who you ask, between 4 and 6 different strains of Ebola viruses. And we think that it circulates among bat populations without causing symptoms. But again, we have not confirmed this. And then something happens. And the bats are in contact with these other forest animals like the duiker, like the chimpanzees. Chimpanzees might be hunting the bats. And then they get infected, or humans interact with the bats and get infected, or humans interact with the chimpanzees or the duikers and get infected. Why are viruses prevalent in bats? Oh, Nate, that is such a good question. And I can't answer it off the top of my head. I know there are a couple of things that I can say. One is that bats are very social and live in crowded conditions or sleep in crowded conditions. There are large numbers of bats in any given location. So when you have large numbers of people living in crowded conditions, they're going to pass around a lot of viruses. They're going to have more viruses. Same thing with bats. I know there is something about bat physiology that increases the numbers of viruses present, but I can't for the life of me remember off the top of my head what that is. I'd have to look that up. And remember, bats make up, what is it? A quarter of all mammal species. So there's lots and lots of bats. So some of it is just that there are lots and lots of them. They also travel. So they can carry disease from one place to another. Rodents also house a lot of viruses that can be spread to people, but they don't travel long distances. So we're less likely to interact with those animals because they're, you know, living in a small location. Does that help, Nate?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So prevention, reduce human wildlife contact. This is the case for a lot of zoonotic diseases. A lot of epidemics start with human wildlife contact. I mean, that's how COVID started. It's hard to reduce that though, especially in places where they depend on wild animals as a food source. Move. In the case of Ebola, those antelope, primates, bats, and also porcupines. Reduce human to human transmission. Hey, Fidget, you're in my way. I can't see what I'm typing. Hi, yes, go away. Oh, you can sit on my lap or you can get on the floor. That's your option. There you go. Sorry about that. Using personal protective equipment, including gloves, face protection, regular hand washing is beneficial. We talked about doing contact tracing and monitoring people who've been in contact with infected people. Ebola. Oops. Ebola can be spread by sex. So the use of condoms helps. And in fact, we're going to get to this, but the virus can survive in the body of people who have recovered for months. So condoms for 1 year after recovery. Pregnant and nursing women. You need to meet with specialists to deal with any potential pregnancy complications and because Ebola can spread by breast milk. So you want to check the breast milk and confirm that there's no virus before the mother nurses. Remember how I talked about how this is a disease of impoverished areas? You think they can afford formula? No, they really can't. So a lot of these precautions are impractical.
A lot of them don't even believe in it anyway.
Yeah.
Outside of being able to afford it.
Yeah. People who survive, I just mentioned that the virus can survive in the body. We don't know exactly how long. We think it's on the order of months. So it's, kind of tricky. But the survivors often have long-term post-viral syndrome. They have symptoms of fatigue, muscle aches, eye and vision problems, and stomach pains that can last long periods of time after recovery. Ebola has economic and social impacts. Let's think about this. What is one of the major sources of income for African countries that might drop and disappear during an Ebola outbreak?
Travel.
Yes, travel and tourism. When Ebola outbreaks occur, tourism declines by between 50 and 80%, even in countries that are not experiencing the outbreaks. Villages that are hit hard may be abandoned by the survivors. A lot of people will have PTSD. I mean, you can imagine this comes through your village, half your village dies. You're going to have PTSD. There's just no way around it. You're going to be traumatized by that. So there are lots of longer term effects of these outbreaks. Okay, what kind of questions do you guys have?
How does study of smallpox help with treating Ebola?
How does the study of smallpox help? The study of smallpox helped us develop vaccinations and the concept of vaccinations. And now we have vaccines. We don't yet know how long the vaccines protect people, but they certainly can be used to kind of bring an outbreak to a screeching halt. You do contact tracing and you vaccinate all those contacts, and it appears that that prevents them from getting Ebola.
So if you have Ebola, is it a death sentence?
If you have the strain that was originally called the Zaire strain, it's about a 90% death sentence. The Sudan strain is about a 50%, but we're Americans. If we come back to the United States and get medical treatment, or go to Europe and get medical treatment, the likelihood of dying drops a lot. We don't know exactly how far down it is with modern medical care, because there haven't been that many cases treated with modern medical care.
So a lot of these viruses originate in Africa, where they say life originated as well. I wonder what the connection of that is, if any.
So you do have a good point there. I think that there are probably more viruses in tropical areas because there's more biodiversity in tropical areas. So Central America, especially Central Africa, parts of Southern and Southeastern Asia, I think that we feel like a lot of these viruses come out of Africa because the diseases that came out of Europe are things that European society has lived with for a very, very long time. And so we just don't tend to think about them.
So we're seeing first contact a lot, you're saying, or with these things.
A lot of these are first contact things, yes. And it has to do with a lot of development. So when you've got small population sizes and people living in villages, if they don't have a lot of contact with the outside world and they encounter a bat that has Ebola, it can wipe out their village and nobody knows, right? But now we're starting to see more and more contact with these groups, but there's still a lot of wilderness left in Africa. Thankfully, and hopefully it will stay that way. And a lot of people who live in these remote villages are more likely to encounter wildlife. People who live in England or France or Germany, they're not likely to interact with wildlife very often.
So it's the jungle versus the concrete jungle.
Yes.
Cheers.
Yeah. I don't remember if I have mentioned this one. I mean, we don't know where a lot of diseases came from. Things that have been with us for a long time, things like measles and polio, which were deadly diseases in their own right. But we have vaccines against them. They almost never show up anymore. Where did they originate? We don't know. They've been with us for so long, we don't know. I am surprised we aren't getting more diseases out of Central and South America. But that may be perception or chance that we just haven't found the deadly diseases there yet. When going off on a sidetrack, when the Europeans came to the New World and they brought things like measles and smallpox with them and salmonella, which killed off huge numbers of the natives. Those diseases all went one direction across the Atlantic, from Europe to the Americas. One disease went the other way, and that was syphilis. Why is that?
Maybe herd immunity? The people that were immune?
Why would we be immune to syphilis? Oh, Europeans. Why would Europeans be immune to syphilis if they'd never seen it before?
Cheers.
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of thing to think about. And I've got a good idea of why scientists think they went that way. But I was just hoping some of you guys would come up with something. Jerry's just shaking his head.
Maybe, okay, so you know how like in India, their digestive system are used to the bacteria there, but if we go and we drink the water, we have issues. I don't know what that's called, but is it similar to that effect?
No.
I was trying something.
You're trying.
Where's Nate at, man? Come and save me, bro.
Nate's having construction outside of his house. There's a water main being repaired. So that's probably why he's being quiet, or That's probably what's going on with him. Okay, so let's think about this. Christopher Columbus, 1492, sailed across the Atlantic. How long did that take?
6 months, probably.
Probably. It took months, definitely. Now, if a ship caught a disease in America that was deadly to the Europeans, and they had to go back across the Atlantic, what's going to happen? They're all going to get sick while they're en route.
Yeah,
if-
kind of like the smallpox deal. They might get sick en route, but then they might become immune or have some resistance by the time they reach the land.
Yes. Or it will kill them off, and there won't
Right.
be enough soldier or enough sailors left to get the rest of the crew to Europe.
Yeah.
That's really probably what happened there. Hi, Nate. Any more questions on Ebola?
Is there still outbreaks to this day? Like, is it still because I remember there was a period, I think it was like 2015, where it was like big, but that, and then Zika, like right after that. I didn't know if it
Oh,
was
yeah.
still at that kind of level.
Yeah. The last Ebola outbreak was last year.
Okay.
So yes, I'm sure there are going to be more of them. Yeah, Zika probably came out of Central or South America.
I believe it was mosquito
Mm-hmm.
based too, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was affecting, couldn't it lead to like stillbirths? This is all off memory, so I might not be. Oh, okay.
Stillbirths and microcephaly, which is small head size.
Cephaly. Is that part of the word related to encephalitis? Like of the okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. CEPH always refers to the brain in some.
Yeah, I pick up on those suffixes and prefixes a lot. They're quite common in medical terminology.
It's the great way to learn to understand medical terminology. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Especially, whenever you see something like cyto, it's cell related or intracellular. So.
Yep. Well, that is the Ebola lecture. So if there aren't any other questions, it's spring break time.
Wow.
And we'll be talking about the Black Death when we come back.
Finally.
Megan,
Was that
go ahead.
the one that killed the most in everyone in history so far that we know? Not to jump ahead, but Black Death did the most damage. A lot of those night movies from, King Arthur, it was the Black Death.
Yep.
Everybody. Hours of dead body, smelling up the place. Scariest thing ever.
It was huge. Absolutely. Megan, did you have something to say?
Yeah. So a bit ago, I wrote on my calendar that we have a review quiz on this Thursday, due this Sunday, but I
Yes.
didn't see it under assignments.
I canceled it.
Woohoo! Thank you. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question. The proposals for the big project,
Mhm.